Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us on day one of Cherry Bekaert's 2025 Government and Public Sector Virtual Conference. My name is Denise Leppener, and I'm a partner at Cherry Bekaert and the state and local advisory leader within our government and public sector practice. In this session, you will learn about the evolving grants compliance framework, establishing financial integrity and reporting accuracy, and how to adapt to compliance challenges in the changing grants environment. I am pleased to introduce our speakers for today, Kat Kieser, who is our Grants Management Solutions leader, and Paula Heller, who is a team leader within our Grants Management Solutions practice here at Cherry Bekaert. All right, on to you all.
Thank you, Denise.
Thank you. So we'll get our presentation pulled up, and thank you all so much for being here. We couldn't do this without you. So today, while Paula's getting that pulled up, there we go. Awesome. Awesome, awesome. Again, thank you guys so much. I'm Kat Kieser, Kathleen Kieser, go by Kat. And then we have Paula Heller here. We're going to co-present this. Go ahead to the next slide, Paula. We'll just kind of, hi, Linda. Well, just kind of go to the next one. All right. So a couple of things. We always do a disclaimer because a lot of the things we're talking about are policy driven. We're giving opinions, we're giving our perspectives, but it's not legal advice. So we always put a disclaimer and say, what we're going to tell you is from our perspectives and our opinions, based on what we know. If you need legal advice, please talk to a lawyer or an attorney within your organization or otherwise to get solid and actual legal advice. Go ahead. And then this is copyright notices. Just read through this when you get a chance. These slides are for you guys. Make sure that you use them appropriately. Next. And Paula is doing the slides today. Okay, great. Let's jump in. Super excited to be here and talk about the grants landscape. So between Paul and I, we have probably talked on this subject since January 10, 12 times, whether it's together or it's separately for different forms. So you may have seen us speak on this somewhere else. So just so you know, what we talk about today probably isn't the same thing that we may talk about tomorrow or next week. Every time we speak, there's something new and something evolving. So don't think that if you go to one of these webinars on the grants landscape, that you're going to hear the exact same things, because that is not the case. So today we're going to start with understanding compliance and the emerging compliance challenges. This is going to be our foundation. Then we're going to go to specific areas of compliance. So we're going to give you the tools or the resources that you need for compliance. We're going to move through these fairly quick because we want to get to the adapting to the shifting landscape, where we're going to tell you how to use those tools for within your organization to help adapt and help your organization stay sustainable during this time of all this upheaval and chaos and all the changes that are happening in grants management. And then hopefully we'll get to the key takeaways. If we have time for questions, we'll do those as well. But that's where we would like to start. Okay, Paula. So polling question one, guys. What sector do you represent? So we have federal, state, local, not-for-profit, foundation, commercial, consulting, or maybe there's another category you fit in. So we'll keep this open for a few minutes. And please answer this polling question helps us understand too our audience, so we can adapt a little bit as far as what we're talking about with policies and with executive orders and the proper way to approach and adapting to the landscape as well.
Perfect. So let's see what it looks like.
Oh, great. So we have lots of local governments, state governments, federal, other. Great. If you're other, I would love if you would drop in the chat what kind of organization you're with. I don't know, Paula, whichever one of us can look and see what the others are. So thank you guys so much for that. We'll close that.
So I'm going to take over and I'm going to set what Kat said, which would be that foundation. I want to make sure we're all on the same page, that we're talking the same language, because we need to build from there. So consider this like our base level of scaffolding. So what is compliance? Why is it important? Then we'll move into looking at federal compliance and then agency specific compliance, which is an evolving story every single day. So broadly, let's look at compliance in this regulatory environment that we're in. We all know 2 CFR 200 is our uniform guidance. Also, that's within Part A. But if you look at 2 CFR Part B, there's also compliance specific for different agencies. So make sure you're looking in both of those places for your compliance requirement. The next layer is going to be administrative priorities. And I know it feels like we've had a lot of administrative priorities, and we've had a high volume. This is a very normal part of a transition in leadership at the White House. We also have indirect cost rates to be thinking about always. In particular, some agencies are trying to cap those, and there's some legal pieces happening with that. There's also training requirements. So it's now mandatory for grant administrators and financial managers to have training so that they understand and stay informed about what compliance is. Reporting and monitoring has become a hot button for compliance as well. We're looking at a lot more leaning towards that programmatic reporting, and are you delivering? So what I mean by that is if I'm a funder and I give you $1, I want to see what my return on investment is. I want to see what you delivered with that. So that program reporting is becoming more critical. Then we have civil rights compliance. Grantees have to have accessibility, non-discrimination, and new individuals with limited English proficiency should have access. Procurement rules with the new update to uniform guidance. We had a significant change in the language of procurement and making sure that you're compliant with that. It's really important. There's now a demand for post-award approval in advance if you're going to do a non-competitive contract over $250,000. And there's stricter documentation for subawards, which would mean your subrecipient and subrecipient monitoring. And then finally, data security. It's really critical. We have to protect sensitive information. We have PHI if you're in the health industry. We need to make sure that we're addressing that. And Tiffany touched on that a little bit earlier in her performance audit work. So if we go to the next slide, we talk about why it's important. And I'm going to read from the right to the left, because I think starting off with limited resources, I've never worked with a client. I've never been in a job where we had an abundance of humans, time, and money to do our work. And so we're typically running pretty lean operations at state and local government, nonprofits, and obviously now at the federal level, it's gotten a lot leaner. So limited resources can sometimes mean that compliance becomes like the second thought. We've got to do our program delivery. We've got to do our financial reporting. We have to track our dollars. But compliance requirements with limited resources, it still needs to be a pretty high priority. Why? Because there's high expectations. When you receive these funds, you are a steward of federal, state, local, philanthropic, or even a commercial entity is giving you a grant. The donors really want to see that you have used the funds appropriately. And there's a lot of pressure right now for public transparency. So that means that it has a high impact. When you fail to be a good steward of your grant funds, you raise the risk that you as an organization face. And so we all know that part of the pre-award phase for 2 CFR 200 compliance is to do a risk assessment of a recipient to make sure that they should be receiving funds. You have operational risk, you have financial risk, but also you have reputational risk. So if I wanted to back away from the importance of grant compliance and think about the 3 areas that I think are most important that you be paying attention to, treatment of financial cost, consistent treatment of cost and how you're doing your cost allocation. That's a big component. Also, subrecipient monitoring, ensuring that you've really done a thorough assessment, a monitoring on an annual basis or whatever the grant requires. And then don't forget to go back and make sure that you are testing for compliance, not only for yourself as a recipient, but for your subrecipients. And there's even some compliance expectations for contractors. So Kat, can you tell us about federal compliance?
I can. So let's jump into talking about federal compliance, like Paula said. And so here we're talking about our handy dandy 2 CFR 200 uniform guidance that helps us know our rules and regulations that are determined by the federal government and how we need to follow them. So we know that last October, we had a major overhaul and a lot of things changed. So now, what was the purpose of this? They wanted to streamline, they wanted to reduce administrative burden, kind of make some clarifying language in there, because as we know, we can go in and read the 2 CFR 200, and sometimes it just doesn't make sense, or you read something here and you read something here, you know, they're different. You know, what are you actually supposed to be following? What's the actual language? What's the actual standard that you're supposed to follow? So they tried to work on that, clarify the language, clarify some of the different statutes or the statutes in there. And they wanted to promote transparency and accountability as well. They want to make it easier for anyone using the 2 CFR 200 to be able to understand the language across any type of organization. So that's applied to federal, non-federal, tribes, and governments, IHEs, which always have a little bit of difference in their guidance, but it was there. And it covered everything from the pre-award to the post-award to the closeout. So it's still split up the same. Basically, you have your subparts, you have your acronyms, you have your definitions, your general provisions, pre-award, post-award, closeout, cost principles for the auditing, and then audit requirements as well. So we did see this happen. Well, what else is happening? Well, we just learned not too long ago that they are looking at making changes again. Do we know what those are? No. Can we say maybe do we know what those are? Guess-wise, more clarity. And we're going to talk a lot about the focus here on performance outcomes instead of compliance outcomes, that it's looking like the grants landscape is going to here. So let's go to the next slide. So let's talk about subawards for a minute. Subawards is another category right now that's very hot, and you want to make sure that you're doing everything necessary to be compliant with your subaward. They want more transparency, and they want more accountability towards subawards. Like right here, some of the issues they identified is incomplete reporting. There's a lot of incomplete reporting that's coming through. Inadequate monitoring of subrecipients. Unfortunately, that's pretty prevalent across the board. It's one of those areas folks say, I just don't have the capacity or the people to do it, and it doesn't get done, though it is a requirement to be done. So that is a highlight here as well. And the failure to verify eligibility. That's another thing folks forget to do. They're like, oh, I'm supposed to do a risk assessment, but I didn't do the risk assessment. We're supposed to verify eligibility. We didn't do that. These are musts. So these are some things that we are now going to have to focus on when we're looking at our grants and we're looking at compliance with our grants. Why? Fraud. They're trying to reduce fraud. So let's GOA and OMB. So at this point, what are they doing? Trying to improve single audit quality. And by the way, all these points we're talking about, you'll see them flushed out later on at the end of here, where we're going to talk more about these. Looking at IT investment reviews and a lot of fraud risk management. It's one of the changes that we saw with the October 1st change in 2024 is how you report fraud. You know, what are the words and the terminology and how and when you report it. So those are some things that we're actually focused on right now. And what's going to happen? More rigorous audits, guys. Unfortunately, it's going to be more data driven. The audits are going to be tailored more, and they are going to be more rigorous. All right. Okay, Paula. Good. Polling question 2. I know we have a little reading here for this. So what we'd like to know is, how has this current grants landscape affected your organization? Because it affects everyone differently, right? So has it significantly improved? We received so much more funding than support we have ever before. I don't expect many here, but you never know. It's somewhat improved. We've had a modest increase in our success rates, our opportunities, our grant awards. Hasn't changed a thing in our organization. It's been kind of challenging, but we're doing all right. It's been really challenging. We're losing funding. We're facing major obstacles in our grants landscape, or this really doesn't apply to us. So we'll just give you a few seconds here.
I'm very curious. I wanted to go back, Kat, you're just talking about fraud. And the big change is that you have to report if you suspect it. Normally, what you would have done is you would have done an internal investigation if there was an allegation of fraud, and then you would report it. But now, if you suspect it, you are obligated to report it immediately. And then you can start your investigation. That's a significant change.
Right.
All right, let's see how we did. Okay.
As suspected, not much is significantly improved. But I do like that there hasn't been much change. Well, I like it and I don't like it. And we can talk about that later, because we do have a lot of things going on. So you need to be aware of those and be ready. Challenging, yes, definitely. So great. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you. So I'm going to tackle some agency-specific compliance, and note that we did these slides a few weeks ago. Things have changed. There's updates. I also have a geriatric dog that I think is about to have a meltdown. So if she starts barking, I apologize. So here are some current trends. Here's what's happening. We all know, and I think it was Emily this morning, if you were part of that, we know what happened with the pause on spending from OMB memo M2513, that they turned around and rescinded right away. But what we are really seeing is that agencies are prioritizing performance monitoring, risk assessments, and audit readiness. And unfortunately, underperforming recipients may face funding freezes or grant terminations. I've done a couple of webinars on those terminations. There's some specific language that has to be in the terms and conditions of your contract for it to just be a change that's made because of change in priorities for an agency. But our recommendation is don't do anything that could lead to termination, which is our topic today, staying in compliance. We've also had some issues with indirect cost recovery. Some agencies have been putting out a cap that's going through a legal battle. There's a little bit of back and forth with that. But what I think what's happening is it's pushing nonprofits, academic institutions. It's forcing people to rethink their cost structures and improve their financial planning. One model I've seen out there is called the FAIR model. It's a model developed for cybersecurity. But what essentially can be translated in grant land is if I normally had 30% indirect costs, now I only have 15, where is that other 15% going to live? And can I take that 15% and turn it into a direct cost? So an example would be payroll. Normally that's going to sit in your indirect cost pool. Instead, now we can figure out what percent of our payroll burden is related to grants and then direct charge that. So it'll be interesting to see how people adapt. We're also seeing a rise in cooperative agreements. Requires a heavier involvement from the federal agency. It's a really collaborative approach. There's a high level reporting, but that shift is happening. And then, of course, we know we've had the uniform guidance updates, but I'll go on a different route. We haven't seen the 2025 compliance supplement yet. Normally that comes out around May. And I think Kat was able to, in another speech that she did, kind of figure out they're having to write it two different ways. And the compliance supplement is what drives the audit process. And so they're having to write it for if you had an award as of September 30th versus when you had an award as of October 1st. So I think there's a little bit of things that are being clarified still. So we're hoping we'll see that. because, you know, audits are going to need to happen. And so we really need that compliance supplement guidance. So NIH, I did a snapshot of a couple of different agencies, what we would consider our executive agencies. And just in a short period of time, so many things just flying out. And I put this here to say that not only do you need to be thinking about 2 CFR 200 compliance, agency-specific compliance in 2 CFR Part B, but you also need to be looking at what the agency is putting out. And so here we see 5 things from NIH in, you know, a 100-day window. And we could kind of say the same thing with the Department of Energy. We've had some executive orders that are driving a change in approach to the Department of Energy and how it prioritizes its work. So we're moving away from kind of those clean energy, solar and wind, and coming back to geothermal and water technologies. There's just a realignment of how that funding is going out. And similarly, you know, U.S. Department of Education's been all over the news. Its fate is hitherto unknown at this point. We also had USAID, the Agency for International Development, which is it's been dismantled. It's transitioned whatever actions it has. It's at the State Department now. HUD, Health and Human Services, has undergone a lot of changes, and Department of Transportation. So I put this in here so you can come back and revisit it. But the key takeaway from this for me is that you have to stay on top of what's happening at the federal level, at the 2 CFR Part B level, and you also need to stay in touch with your agency so that you know what changes are happening. And that is going to bring us to our third polling question. We have 5. So have you had any federal funded grants terminated since January 2025? Yes, no, I don't know. And I'll be curious to see the answer to this, Kat.
Definitely. I mean,
We
we've seen it
know.
we've seen
2020.
several people lose funding. We've been, oh boy, yeah, we've been on the forefront of that ourselves and watching an organization lose its funding right in front of us. And it was devastating. Really, it was terrible.
We went and did a two-day training for a client, and we finished at about 4 o'clock. And then at 6 o'clock, they got a notice that they were terminated.
Yeah, that's difficult.
Very difficult. All right, let's see what kind of answers we have. This is a pretty straightforward question. No, and I don't know. So we have a good number of I don't knows.
We sure do. Yeah.
But
And we have a good number of
17%.
yeses, unfortunately.
Yeah, 17%. That makes a difference.
Right.
All right, so I'm going to toss it back to you, Kat.
Great. So real quick, I just want to address quickly a question that was in the Q&A asking about the 2025 uniform guidance updates. No, they are not out. No, we have no idea really. We have our perspectives on what we think they're going to do with the uniform guidance this time. And we don't know when it will come out, but hopefully we'll find out here well, we should find out within the year, but when, we don't know. So, all right, let's talk about some emerging compliance challenges. I'm going to go through these quick. This is basically just factual stuff. I can just talk through real quick and show you. So let's talk about that 15% indirect cap cost. First of all, what's going to happen in the future with this is really up in the air. Is this something that's going to go forward and it's going to be everyone's going to have a 50% cap rate cost, a cap rate cap, or indirect cost rate cap? Or is this something that will keep going back and forth in the court system and going around? Remains to be seen. But as of now, since January, we have seen NIH apply that 15% cap. NSF has also implemented that cap. DOE has on some of its HIEs, and DOD, so I guess I should say Department of Defense, and Department of Energy is the one prior to that. Department of Defense, they also have put a 50% cap on some of their new awards as well. So what does this mean to you? Well, especially for IHE that tend to have high indirect cost rates, this brings down that administrative cost recovery that they can get from their grants significantly. So this makes the IHEs especially, and others as well that may be going through this, they have to go out and figure out how to supplement with other funding from the organization where this 15% cap has actually been instilled now. For existing awards, no changes are required at this point. Going forward, those changes will be required. And again, uncertainty. We're not sure what's going to happen in the future with this. It could go all one way into 15%, all the other, or anywhere in between. Okay, next. So here's a big thing that I had learned about probably last week about this time, this performance-based funding expectation. So right now we're looking at through policies of going to evidence-based, performance metric-based practices and reporting for grants. So they are going to want to, or what they're trying to do is standardize these metrics. And this is down the road, guys. So this is something that we're working through. They're working through right now. And it's probably be 3, 4, so many years down the road. This is a really an intensive change and will take a lot of standardization and a lot of work to get this up and running. They really want to focus on data infrastructure, data integrity, revising these notices of funding opportunities so that they're saying, hey, now everything is going to be performance-based and your reporting will be based on performance. It'll be based on compliance to a point. It'll still be based on some compliance, but now we want to know your outcomes, not your outputs. We want to know how your project affected the community or such, things like that. And they're also going to look at equity and community engagement along with that. So what does that mean for you? More accountability, learning a whole new system, right? Here we go. We're going to change. Now we're going to be reporting on different things. Data and evaluation are going to be very important. And competitive advantage for evidence-based programs. Application processes are going to be more difficult because now you have to say how you're going to provide, what are these performance metrics? How do you meet them? So a little more work. And then making sure you have that equity and community engagement, and how do you put that in a performance metric, and how do you measure that as well? Okay, we'll go to the next key policy change. So audit readiness and documentation. Another thing we're looking at is stronger emphasis on internal controls. So if you and your organization right now aren't familiar with the General Accountability Office, Governmental Accountability Office, or COSO, those are all organizations that focus on transparency and internal controls and standardization of those internal controls. Auditors also use them as well. Get familiar with those because there's going to be stronger emphasis on those internal controls, and they'll need to be integrated into your organization or maybe updated depending on if you have them and how weak or strong they are at this point. There's going to be more documentation requests, which with more performance metrics on top of what we're already looking at, definitely more documentation to support those metrics. So we've seen some updated audit thresholds already, right, through the OMB last year. And that was put in place to provide a little bit of relief for folks, especially smaller organizations, on single audits. So that is going to continue. We're going to see that relief. The system of quality management mandate, that is actually something that a procedure that was introduced by AICPA and IAASB this past year that creates a set of policies and procedures to ensure compliance. And this would actually be used by firms like us, Cherry Bekaert, when it's auditing. And so when they come to audit you, they have specific standards, they have specific legal requirements. The quality should be a certain standard, and the appropriate the engagements, the outcomes should all be standard and appropriate. So this is a new thing for firms such as us and auditors when they're coming in to do your audit. and they now need to follow the system of quality management mandate. I think, I'm not positive, I'm not an auditor. This may have been some way implemented in auditing already. So that's something that you just need to be aware of, that this actual mandate is going to standardize more of that auditing process when it comes to what they have to do. And then another big thing, cybersecurity and data integrity requirements. What are those going to do? That's something that is a big thing right now. We all know we have cybersecurity issues. We all need to address them, and it is becoming a stronger and stronger policy. So learn, I guess, your implications is non-compliance, right? You have to have strong internal controls. You need to be ready for your audit. Make sure you're going to start seeing those grants that are going to say you have to have cybersecurity software, or however they stated in there. Make sure you're ready for that as well. We're going to go on so we can move forward. There you go.
All right. And definitely, Kat, I think that's really important to be thinking about all of those things, because at the end of the day, as these things are rolled out or things that already exist, you have to stay in the know. So let's go and look at some specific areas of compliance. We're going to look at financial integrity. We'll look back at internal controls and how that relates to risk management, the role that technology can play. And I think that's a really important thought, and sustaining funding and compliance.
Hey, Paula, let's try to run through this, like, if you don't
Yep.
mind, fairly quick, because I think the meat and potatoes are in section 4, and I don't want to miss out on that.
Absolutely.
Thank
The
you.
graphic says everything you need to say. Accurate financial tracking and reporting. Have your systems in place. Document your cost allocation methodology and back it up, particularly with time and effort. There's a lot of risk there if you're not certifying or you're not keeping time cards. And then make sure you're following the cost principles. There also is a whole extra section. We want to be necessary, reasonable, and allocable, but there's a whole extra section that talks about specific areas of cost. So for example, with advertising, what's allowable and what's not allowable. So you can advertise for your program, you can advertise for positions, but there's other advertising you can't. So you need to be really, really knowledgeable about costs. Then, of course, it's super important to have your internal controls. You could segregation of duties, regular audits, your documentation standards. Even if you're a small organization, you have to find a way to have segregation of duties at a minimum. This is about reducing fraud. Then make sure that you have approvals and workflows that can prove that it went through the proper process as you designed it. Some ERPs have this built in. Sometimes it's a cover sheet on a packet that's being passed around with a wet signature. But make sure that you can document the approval, because if you didn't document it, it didn't happen. And also make sure that you're reconciling on a monthly basis. And then proactively be looking at risk. Anticipate what risks may be and think about the mitigation strategies. Sometimes a risk has a high impact, or it's a high priority, or it's a very complex risk. Identify it in that manner and figure out how you're going to deal with it. Sometimes the best solution is to offload it to a third party. So if you have a risk of payroll compliance, outsource your payroll and make sure that they're staying on top of the compliance so that you don't have to. So those are some good strategies for risk management. Leveraging technology, I know it's just happening by leaps and bounds, but the more you can automate compliance tasks, you can build in reminders, pop-ups in your calendar for reporting, any way that you can systematize and reduce what I would call the grunt work. We want to be available to do the thought leadership and the strategic planning we need to be able to do. So don't forget that technology, and particularly grants management software, can play a super high role in making sure you're compliant. And sustaining your funding. So I think, ultimately, the better you are at administering your grants and delivering your deliverables and producing that return on investment that a funder is looking for, the more likely you're going to be able to sustain your funding and compliance. Build strong relationships, diversify your funding sources. I know it's important to think about what other avenues, and especially If you're not 100% grant-based, what else could we? Could we be providing a service for a fee where we can generate more revenue? Invest in your compliance infrastructure, build it out, take the time to make sure that everybody at the table understands what those compliance requirements are and that we have all the tools we need. Then conduct regular risk assessments. Don't just do it once and say, well, we did it, let's put that on a shelf. This should be an ongoing process. And then plan for sustainability early. When we talk about sustainability, we're not just talking about financial, we're talking about operational, we're talking about sustainability for an organization moving forward. So it's bigger than just the money, but you should be planning that at the pre-award phase when you're applying for a grant. And now we're at polling question number 4. What type of grant funding is the most prevalent in your organization? Is it government grants, foundation grants, research grants, corporate grants, or other? We'll give you a second. So I know I ran through that really fast, but I hope the slides will be helpful for you. And then maybe when I'm not on speed mode talking, you can go back and listen to the presentation at 0.75% speed. All right, let's see what the answer is. What do we know? I hope everybody got in there. We have 5, so you only have to hit 4. Okay. So government grants, federal, state, or local government. And so that lack of diversity in there tells me that's the work that we need to be doing in our grant management. We need to be looking at that portfolio and thinking about how we can access other sources of funds. All right, Kat, adapting to a shifting landscape. And this one, we're just going to toss back and forth between us.
Yeah, we're gonna pretend like we're doing one of our handy dandy our podcasts, and we're gonna just we're just gonna talk so we can get you guys in the know. So here's the thing: when we put this together, we had these 3 points to the shifting landscape. Well, you know, this changes every day. So we also have some other points to talk about, and they're not on the slide. So you can get out your old-fashioned paper and pencils or whatever type of notebook you want to use and take some notes here if you like. And unfortunately, they're not in here because they're very current. So when we're talking about the adjusting to the shifting landscape, what has happened? What is going on? First of all, we already talked about the uniform guidance. We know those changes have occurred. We know more changes are going to occur. So we just have to keep our eye on that, right? What else is happening? We know we have a ton of budgetary shifts happening because of executive orders, because of appropriations. We know our funding is super uncertain. Everything's chaotic. Things are changing every day. We don't know what's coming next. Then we had the one big beautiful bill, which we will talk a little bit more about later on. And we'll talk about how that might affect your federal funding. So 2, actually 3, one real quick one. We're going to add on here. That's happened, I'd say, within the past 5 days or so. We have number 1, which I just saw yesterday, which Paul, I don't even know if we talked about this, and we're talking about civil rights, but the DOJ, Department of Justice, said with their federal funding assistance, they will be focusing more on the civil rights aspect. So that may be changes in their NOFOs. It may be changes in procedures that you have to follow. It may be reporting. So that is the first thing I heard. And again, I believe that was yesterday when that came out. The next thing we have that you guys probably didn't know we were going to talk about is tariffs. So I'm going to make this quick so we can get through. We have 10 minutes. Tariffs. How are these tariffs? So they're coming on strong here in August. We're up about 18% in tariffs. Think about your projects and how they're funded. Think about your grants. Think about what's going to happen if the cost you need to do your projects with your grant funding is affected. Number 3, pocket rescissions. Real quick on pocket rescissions, another new buzzword that just came out, or words rather, that have just came out, is basically where the president goes in and it's real close to the end of the fiscal year and he says he wants to rescind particular funding. He has a short period of time to do that. And then the period of time is missed, and that funding that you have not obligated, or funding that you had appropriated that you thought you were getting, or that funding that you couldn't get spent is now gone and rescinded. So I'm not going to get too much into that. It's a really great topic, but we're short on time. But please note those things and look into them. Okay.
And I think we've really talked about this a lot, and so I'm not going to spend any time here. But we know that you have to be paying attention to what's happening with uniform guidance. We know another update is coming. That's part of our shifting landscape. So we all know about the pause on O&B, but several agencies are realigning with the new political priorities. I mean, it's a mandate once the executive order goes in. So you have to be nimble in your approach to shift as well. There's also a lot of change at the federal level in leadership. It seems like people are being fired every week and hired. There's also a lot of ongoing litigation and political challenges that are happening. So I encourage you, as part of the way that you're adjusting to the shifting landscape, that you're constantly connected to reliable sources of information, like Kat said before, attending things like this.
And we'll go real quick through this slide. Big, beautiful bill. How will it affect us on the grants landscape? So, that big, beautiful bill basically was a whole bunch of legislation that they threw all together and passed it all at one time. The basic things covered in there are tax policy changes. So states, think about this. You're going to have to adjust to all of these federal changes as well. A lot of state and local tax changes, Medicaid cuts coming across the board, SNAP food assistance will affect us as well, and student loan assistance as well. So we're going to look at and see more federal transfers, so more pressure on the states and more work by the states, and more compliance like we talked about. So if you have the housing, education and such like we spoke about, those seem to be the areas. Housing, education and public health are three areas that could really suffer from these particular policy changes that we're talking about. So like Paula said, stay up to date on those, and the states will also have to adjust along with these federal changes, which will also affect you at local level and not-for-profit and otherwise. So how does this impact us? We've already seen delayed disbursements. How many of us out there have, hey, I try to go in, I can't get in the portal, they won't let me draw down. We've already seen that, and we know that affects our organizations and our cash flow, right? PUP program suspensions, the DEI, the environmental justice programs, those being paused, those being terminated. They are affecting organizations, a lot of the not-for-profits too that deal in these areas, and they're small. Some of them are very small. It can really hurt. So how is this affecting us? How do we sustain? How do we make it better? Operational disruptions for the same reasons, and research institutions. There's been a lot of changes for them because some stuff that's happened with Harvard, and then increased compliance pressure, because we don't want to do anything at this point for any reason they could take away any funding. So we have to work harder to make sure that we stay compliant. Okay.
All right. And so now we're going to shift. The goal is here that we're going to talk to you about how to live, survive in these adjusting, shifting landscapes. So I have 5 pretty high level recommendations, but the implications go pretty deep when you start to look under the engine and see what's going on. So the first one is risk assessment and scenario planning. We talked about risk assessment before. I think it's really important that you identify your risks, you figure out how significant they are and how you're going to mitigate them. But the next thing I would say about that is use the outcome of that to run different scenarios. Come up with contingency plans, A, B, and C. If this happens, what next? And then prioritize things that are really mission critical. Put your attention when you're seeking out future funding for things that are very, very close to your mission. You don't want to stray too far away. It's going to be a very competitive environment, whether you're going for federal, state, local, foundation, or commercial support. You want to be as tightly tied to that mission. Then I'd say explore funding diversification. I used to run a private school. It was 90% tuition revenue, 10% fundraising. I started writing grants. I expanded our summer program from 6 weeks to 10 weeks to better serve our community. I thought of ways that we needed to diversify so we didn't have all of our eggs in one basket. If you haven't already been thinking about that, I highly encourage you to think about how you can leverage public and private partnerships in a new, unique, and creative way. So think outside of the box. The third recommendation I have is to really strengthen your grants management infrastructure. You want to take a step back and make sure you've done everything you can to set yourself up for success. So update your internal controls, test your internal controls. Are they working? Invest in grant management software. Investing in technology overall, I would say, is super, super important. And then train your staff. Make sure that they understand the changes in compliance. They understand this shift to performance-based measurements and metrics, and that they're doing everything they need to do for you to be successful in your current and your future awards. And particularly with time and effort and allowability of cost. Those are the two big zingers we see a lot. And procurement. Procurement really needs to understand compliance. Then build some financial resilience and liquidity. I think this is really important. I know that we always can't, but if you can have an operating reserve, then if you have a 3-month suspension on a program, you have something to draw on to keep those people, to keep those costs that you had already put out to a contractor, potentially establish a line of credit to give yourself a little wiggle room, and then look at your indirect cost rate. Is it up for renegotiation? Do you need to run that again? Do you not have one? And look at if there's anything in your indirect cost pool that could move into your direct cost pool. Then finally, be ready, be an advocate, and be legally prepared. There's no reason you're not lobbying if you communicate with the people in Washington, D.C. You can be an influencer. Pay attention to what's legal, legally developing, and then document everything. If you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. So don't make a decision today, and then next month you say, well, how do I make that decision? Have something written down that really guides you. So Kat, how many
Yeah,
slides?
so yeah, I'm gonna let you guys read through these. It's a lot of the same we've talked about. How, make sure you look at these though, because I did get a question about internal controls. So go in and read these next slides. We have to wrap up, unfortunately. And so if we can go, so read through how you keep that going, read through this one on post and pre-award, takeaways, think about the changes that have happened, think about how you're going to address them, and be futuristic. So don't just sit on it and say, when it happens, we'll go ahead and we'll look at it. Think about your organization, sustaining it, what you need to do to go forward. That's my point anyway. So, okay, let's go to the last poll question.
And our last polling question,
Yeah.
would you like for a team member to reach out after today's webinar? Yes, maybe in a month or two, or no? And thank you. We really appreciate you listening to us today. We were super happy to present. We think it's super important that we share our knowledge with people.
Yeah, and please email us. I know I had a couple questions I couldn't get to in the chat. I did answer a couple, but feel free to send us an email. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
And that concludes our third session today. The next and last session today will be right after this at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Our last session will equip public sector leaders and IT professionals with essential knowledge of cybersecurity risks facing government agencies and public institutions. If you haven't signed up for the next session yet, please check the chat for the registration link. When you exit the session, a brief survey will pop up. We love your feedback. Also, the recording to this session will be available in about a week. Thank you again for joining us. If you have any questions, please reach out to us at any time.